Look at all my saffron blooms. I got actually 5 of them open today. It's late August and it's getting to be that time of year when I wake my saffron bulbs out of dormancy to get them ready for a new season. And if we haven't met before, my name is Tara and I live in the beautiful Bay Area and I am growing saffron for 4 years now. So today we're going to be talking about some of the most frequently asked questions that I've received over the past years of growing saffron and some of the lessons that I've learned the hard way. So first we're going to be talking about some of the questions you might have before you even buy saffron. Things like, should you be even growing saffron in the first place? We'll then move on to planting and some of the questions about how to plant, where to plant, what kind of soil it needs, etc. And then we'll move on to growing and care. Questions like, when does saffron bloom? How do I care for it while it's during the blooming season, after care, and so on. And then let's talk a little bit about harvesting saffron, processing it and storing it, and maybe even some of my favorite recipes that I use saffron for. The first and probably one of the most common questions that I get is, can I grow saffron? I live in this really cold climate, or maybe it's a very hot and humid climate. Can I grow saffron? I'm going to go out on a limb here and say you can grow saffron anywhere. It is really one of the easiest plants that you can grow, but there are a couple of caveats. The first thing to understand is that saffron, or Crocus sativa, is native to Mediterranean climates. So the hot, long, dry summers and the short, mild winters, those are the types of climates that saffron thrives in. My climate over here in the Bay Area is very typical to saffron's native growing conditions. So saffron grows very easily where I live. Now, if you live in a really cold place where the ground freezes really hard during winter, you would need to dig up your saffron and put it away until the weather conditions are right to get it in the ground or in a container again. Similarly, if you live in a climate where it is very hot, but it is also extremely humid, you still want to be able to dig up those bulbs and put them away for the dormant period, because saffron needs a long, hot, dry summer where it gets practically no water. It needs to sleep. As long as you can simulate those conditions for it, then you should be able to grow saffron anywhere. Another thing that you also need to be aware of is that saffron is very sensitive to the ambient conditions. That's what triggers when it starts to grow again. So during our hot, dry summers, there is no trace of saffron. Even if there's a little sprinkle of water here or there, those things are still sleeping. However, when the weather starts to cool down just a little bit, it's still nice and warm, but it's on the cooling down phase. So the really late part of summer, early fall, for me, that's when the saffron bulbs wake up and start to grow, and that's when I actually want to start giving them water and promote their growth. Now, if you live in a very cold climate, the conditions that I just described might happen a little bit earlier. Maybe in the August time frame is when you need to wake up your saffron. So check into that, check what month your saffron grows best in your particular growing zone. Do a little bit of Googling and find out, and you really should be able to grow saffron anywhere. And the other thing also to be aware of is that saffron grows and produces its blooms within a very short period of time. Within about 4 to 6 weeks, believe it or not, from the time that it wakes up, it will produce its first bloom, and then it will continue to produce for about a couple of weeks or so, and it's all done with the blooming. After that, it produces a lot of green growth, and then it's saving energy into the bulbs to produce for next year. So if your season is super short and saffron doesn't have sufficient time to bloom and then produce the greenery and then go dormant, you might need to rebuy your saffron bulbs every year. But if you live in the magic zones between zones 6 through 9, you should be able to grow saffron no problem at all. The next question that I get a lot is saffron easy to grow? Yes, it is extremely easy to grow. As long as you get it in the ground when the weather is starting to cool off after the heat of summer, that thing should sprout and it should grow and it should produce blooms for you and finish all of that within 2 months. Oh, here's a good one. Should I buy cheap or expensive saffron bulbs? Yes, I have noticed that they come in a wide range of prices. And First off, you want to buy from a reputed source, and I will put a few that I recommend in the description. But even in these reputed sources, if you find a big difference in price, it's probably due to the size of the bulb. You see, saffron actually multiplies really, really quickly. It divides and produces a ton of new baby corms. However, it does take up to 3 years for those little tiny corms to grow to a size that they actually produce a bloom. So usually when you see saffron bulbs that are larger, say about 1 inch or more, those are the ones that you can pretty much be sure that they will produce a bloom that same year. The ones that are tinier than a ½ inch or a centimeter, those will probably not produce for you this year. They may produce next year. Which leads me to the next question, which is, can I expect blooms the first year? Absolutely, you can. The interesting thing about saffron corms is that by the end of the season, after it has produced those long green leaves and has saved up energy, it has also already created the flower. That's why it's able to flower so quickly. So the corm or the saffron bulb actually knows whether it's going to flower the following year, even before it goes dormant. You can definitely expect your saffron to bloom and maybe even produce a couple of blooms if the corm is large enough. If it's not, you might have to wait another year or two. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about planting saffron. So when do you plant saffron? Like I mentioned earlier, if you live in a warm Mediterranean climate like I do, typically mid-September is when I get the saffron into the ground or into containers. Now, if you live in a colder place, then you probably want to plant it somewhere in the August timeframe. Know that you are aiming to get your saffron in the ground at least 8 weeks before your first frost so that it can complete its blooming and go dormant by the time your first frost hits. So where in your garden is the best place to plant your saffron? Now, saffron likes a lot of sun. It doesn't like very, very hot days because it's dormant during that time, but once the weather starts to cool off, plant it in the brightest part of your garden. What kind of soil does saffron need? Saffron needs well-draining soil. You want to plant it about 2 to 3 inches deep, and it absolutely needs to drain well. So if you've got hard clay soil like I do, definitely amend it or plant in containers. And does saffron grow well in containers? Absolutely. In fact, I've been growing saffron only in containers for the past 3 years, and then last year I planted a few in ground here or there just to kind of see whether they like being in ground, and we'll see how they do this year. So stay tuned. I will keep publishing videos on my saffron journey, and in fact I've got an entire playlist documenting my journey with growing saffron right from when I first started almost 4 years ago until now. So I've got plenty of tips and plenty of learnings along the way, and you particularly want to watch the video about saffron's dirty little secret. I'll put a link to it at the end of this one. Now let's talk about growing and care for saffron. So when does saffron bloom? Saffron's botanical name is Crocus sativus. So yes, it belongs to the crocus family, but its behavior is completely opposite of your typical crocuses. Usually crocuses are the first flowers to bloom in late winter, early spring. They even poke through the snow. Saffron, on the other hand, blooms during late summer and early fall, and its blooming window is really short. Only a couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, is when it produces all its blooms, and it's done for another year. So how long does it take for saffron to grow? Now, saffron needs to be woken up from its dormancy, and the way that you do that is you take it from wherever you might have stored it in your garage, or if it is in containers like mine are, then all you need to do is start to water it, and once it senses that water and the right climatic conditions around it, it will start to grow. And believe it or not, I have got a bloom as soon as 4 weeks after I started watering my saffron. Around about mid-September is when I wake it up, and mid-October I get my first bloom. Another question I get a lot is, does saffron need a lot of water? No, saffron does not need a lot of water. I do water it in order to wake it up, and the soil is fairly moist at that point in time. But then after that, only when I notice that the soil is starting to dry out, that's when I give it more water. Most of that growth is coming from the bulb, and so all it needs to do is have that initial moisture where the bulb will swell up, and then it starts growing, and you really don't need to give it much water after that. Here's a good one. What kind of pests is saffron prone to? Not very many, but there is one really nasty one that you need to worry about, and that is squirrels or any kind of rodent, rats as well. They love saffron bulbs. So if you are not protecting your saffron bulbs, and if you've got squirrels or rats in your garden, they will find your saffron bulbs. So I always cover my containers, all my in-ground space with chicken wire whenever I wake up my saffron bulbs, because until then they don't seem to know about the existence of the bulbs. But once the saffron bulbs start to wake up, I don't know what it is, but critters come from everywhere to eat those delicious morsels. So cover your saffron bulbs. They're too expensive to feed to the squirrels. All right, so now let's talk about harvesting and processing your saffron. That first bloom and those beautiful orange stigma that is going to turn into your saffron. First, the bloom has an amazing scent. So make sure that you smell the blooms and enjoy the perfume. And by the way, if you know what saffron smells like, those blooms smell nothing like it. I was also really surprised. And the blooms are so pretty, so do take the time to enjoy them. But you do need to harvest the orange stigma as soon as possible. The flowers typically open early in the morning, and as soon as they open, you've got to harvest them because they deteriorate very rapidly after that. So all you need to do is gently pull at the stigma and it should come out in your hand. And then how do you process this saffron after harvesting? Did you know that there are various grades of saffron? The very tip of the stigma, that's where the most potent flavor and scent is. And that is the very best grade. On the other hand, I actually use the entire stigma. So I guess I use second grade saffron, but that's okay. That's good enough for me. The saffron scent does not come through, like I said, immediately. It takes a while for the perfume to develop. And so you need to dry it for about a week, maybe even 2 weeks. I kind of just leave it there and forget about it for a while. And that's when the saffron perfume actually develops. And then when it's completely dry, you can take it and store it in a little jar. I actually store mine in the refrigerator in a nice airtight jar. Okay, so what if you don't live in the Goldilocks zone like I do in this Mediterranean climate here in California? Well, then you do need to potentially dig up your saffron corms and store them in a dry, dark place until they're ready to be woken up again. And you can just wrap it in shredded paper. Do not store it in a plastic bag. That will cause humidity, which will cause the corms to develop mold. And before you store it, make sure that you clean it up just a little bit, remove some of that dirt with a soft brush. Okay, let's talk about some of my favorite ways to use saffron. I've got 3 or 4 ways that I love to use saffron. One of my favorite ways is by mixing it with Greek yogurt and sugar. It's a dish we call Shrikhand in India, and all you need to do is take a few strands of saffron, maybe 3 or 4 strands. You put a little bit of sugar in a mortar pestle thing and crush it, and then you mix it in with Greek yogurt and some sugar, and it is so good. The other way that I like to use it is in rice pudding. So the dish that we make in India is called Kheer, and it's made by boiling rice in milk until the rice is really, really cooked well. And then you add sugar, you add saffron, and then you add nuts and maybe some raisins as well. Oh, so good. And then there is a savory way to use saffron. Many of us are familiar with a Spanish dish called paella. Well, we've got a similar rice dish in India that we call Pulao that is made with delicious basmati rice and some spices, maybe some onions, and the secret ingredient, saffron. That will give it a lovely orange tinge, as well as the flavor kicks it up several notches. And one of the easiest ways to use saffron is just by mixing it with some milk and some sugar. It makes a most delicious golden drink. So I hope you try a few of these recipes, and if you've got any other questions about saffron, please do ask them in the questions below. And by the way, do you have a friend who might be growing saffron that might have some questions? Why not share this video with them? It will do so much to help the channel. So I hope you learned a little something from this video, and until next time, live green and love your greens.